One of the biggest concerns that people have today with electric vehicles is how long will the battery pack last? Now, luckily, modern electric vehicles are engineered so that the battery pack will most likely last the lifetime of the vehicle. And they have great warranties, somewhere between 8 and 10 years and at least 100,000 miles. And with proper care, your EV's battery pack will most likely last the lifetime of the vehicle. Now, I'm standing here with my 2022 Ford F-150 Lightning. I've owned it for a little over 3 years now. And when I first got the vehicle, I did a number of tests, range tests, charging tests, really to determine how far the vehicle will go and how much capacity the battery pack has. Now that the vehicle is 3 years old and I've driven it about 38,000 miles, I'm going to repeat those exact tests in the same area to see exactly how much degradation my battery pack has had over 3 years and 38,000 miles. Let's get into it. All right, so I'm out on the New Jersey Turnpike, cruising along at 70 miles an hour on the first part of this battery capacity test. The first part being a 70 mile an hour highway range test. I did the 70 mile an hour highway range test with this exact vehicle when I first got it. I had only owned it for, I think it was about 10 days. I had under 500 miles on it, and I did a highway range test, 70 miles an hour, on this same road, the New Jersey Turnpike, and I'm actually duplicating the exact same path that I took. So I'm trying to eliminate any change in the course by riding on the exact same course, starting and hopefully finishing at the same area. Now, one thing I can't control is the weather. I tried to get the temperature to be as close as possible. However, it just wasn't possible. It was warmer here than when I did it. Then when I started that range test in the morning, it was 67 degrees. And when I started this range test today, it was 77 degrees. It's supposed to get up into the low 80s. And when I finished the range test initially 3 years ago, it was, I think, 77 or 78 degrees. So it was close to 80 degrees. But the starting temperature is about 10 miles an hour cooler. That could give me the edge and add a couple of miles more onto today's range test. But what's even more important is the wind. The wind has a great effect on your range and your fuel economy if you're driving a combustion vehicle. When I started the range test 3 years ago, we had a 6 mile an hour headwind. I went back and looked at my notes and the video. The funny thing is today we have a 6 mile an hour wind, but it's a tailwind when I'm starting this range test. So that could mean the beginning of the range test we do a little bit better. But I drive in long loops up and down the New Jersey Turnpike, and that helps to offset if there's any wind. You might get a headwind one way, a tailwind the next, but the wind does change during the day. So you could get aided or hurt on one leg and then the wind dies out and you don't get it back. So, you know, these range tests that I do aren't perfectly contrived. They're not in a lab where everything's controlled. And I like to make sure everybody understands that. So I do try to do everything I can to make it as comparable to the other range tests as possible. I've also set the tires to the proper tire pressure as I did in the first range test. And these are actually the same tires. I haven't changed the tires yet. I have, just under 40,000 miles, around 38,000 miles on the truck. But in the winter months, from December through maybe mid-March, I swapped the tires out with BF Goodrich KO2 tires. So these tires don't have the full 38,000 miles. I have about 12,000 miles on the KO2s. So these have about 26,000 miles on them. And this year, when I swap the tires out sometime in maybe December-ish, I'll probably retire these tires because they have over 25,000 miles on it. This is a heavy truck. There's not a lot of tread left. And that actually favors this range test today compared to the new range test, because when the tires are new, the tread is deeper, there's more rolling resistance, they have better traction. So that alone could account for like 6 or 7 miles of range. So I'm starting out with an edge with the tires, have lower rolling resistance, and I have a tailwind. So this will be interesting how the first half of the range test works out. And that's what I'm going to check in when I'm at like 50% state of charge. And speaking of the tires, I mentioned they're the same tires. They're General Grabbers 275 60 R20s. Those are the stock tires that came with the Lightning. I haven't needed to replace them, but as I mentioned, I will be probably in the spring. I have the climate control set on 72 degrees, as I did on the first test, and at the lowest fan setting. And the tire pressure is correct. So that's what I do to make sure that the range tests are always fair. I also set the speedometer according to GPS. And the Lightning speedometer is right on at 70 miles an hour. It is 70 miles an hour. So that's what we have the Blue Cruise set at. You can tell I have my hands-free Blue Cruise on, as I did with the first video. And cruising along the New Jersey Turnpike. We'll drive it down to 0. The first range test I did when the vehicle was new, I finished up with 270 miles at 0% state of charge, and it said 2 miles of estimated range were remaining. So I didn't drive it till it stopped. I never do that. That's my goal for this range test. I want to drive it till it's at 0% state of charge and 2 or less miles of estimated remaining range. That's when we'll end the range test. And that's only the first half of this battery capacity test. After we've driven it down to 0, I'll plug in at an Electrify America DC fast charge station, actually the same one that I charged the vehicle in after I did the range test 3 years ago. And we'll charge it from 0 all the way up to 100%. And we'll see how many kilowatt hour was added to the battery pack. That's actually a much better metric to use when you're trying to figure out your battery capacity rather than the range test, because there's all these other factors, as I mentioned, wind, temperature, tires, that could affect your range on a range test. But the battery capacity is the battery capacity. Now, there is charging losses that the DC fast charger will have in the vehicle, so that there's a little bit of a wiggle room there. But I know that when the vehicle was new, I DC fast charged it from 0 to 100% 4 or 5 times. I was always right around 135 kilowatt hour that the station dispensed. Sometime it was 133, 136, 135, 134, right in that wheelhouse, 134 to 135 kilowatt hour. So we'll do that full 0 to 100% charge recording today. We'll see how many kilowatt hour gets put back in the pack. And those two things, the driving range at 70 miles an hour and how many kilowatt hour that the station dispensed, we'll compare them to what my results were when the vehicle was brand new, and we'll determine how much capacity loss that my Lightning has had over 3 years and 38,000 miles. I don't think it's going to be much. I've been driving this vehicle and I don't notice a difference. Now, you really have to do a test like this to really tell, because if it's a very minor capacity loss, you won't notice it in daily driving. But I drive it up to my in-laws' house in Vermont frequently. It's a little over 200 miles. And it seems like I get there with the same amount of remaining miles as I did when it was new. So, you know, I'm not expecting a lot of capacity loss here. I really think that Ford did a really good job with the battery and how the battery management system maintains a proper temperature so you don't have capacity loss. Heat is one of the worst things that can really hurt a battery. If they get too hot, that's when you really see degradation. And I also care for it. I don't let the battery sit at a low state of charge for a long period of time. I don't let it sit at 100% for a long period of time. I typically charge to 80 or 85%, and I typically charge when the battery gets down to about 20%. So, you know, I do things that I think I should do to try to maintain good battery health. Okay, well, we're going to check in when I'm at 50% state of charge, and we'll see how far we've gone. State of Charge is powered by Qmerit, North America's premier installer of electric vehicle charging equipment. After I've helped you decide which charger to buy, follow the link in the description of my videos and have Qmerit install it. And if you do follow that link, Qmerit will waive the $150 installation deposit. But this is an exclusive offer for State of Charge followers. So in order to get that offer, you must follow the link in the description of my videos. All right, so we're at 50% state of charge. Half of the range test is over. And I have to say, I'm a little surprised. I thought we'd be around where we were when I did the first range test, which was, I think, 142 miles driven at 50% state of charge. We're at 146.8. So we've gone almost 5 miles farther on this range test than I did when the vehicle was brand new. So yeah, I'm a little surprised. I thought we'd be slightly less, but I guess the driving conditions are a little bit better. It is warmer. It's up over 80 degrees now. And for the first, say, 25% of the range test, we had that great 6 mile an hour tailwind, which then slowed down to 5 miles an hour and then 4 miles an hour. Right now, we're between 3 and 4 miles an hour, and right now it's actually a headwind, but that's super minor. 3 to 4 mile an hour wind is really low, really won't affect it much. So I think we benefited early on, and now we're not really being penalized or benefiting much from such a slight wind. And as I mentioned, I always drive in loops, so I make turnarounds. It seemed like this time I caught every red light. Every time I get off the turnpike, I have to make a U-turn and come back out on to head in the opposite direction. And we do these long loop range tests because you want to end up where you started at basically the same elevation to offset any elevation change. That's why I do all my range tests on the New Jersey Turnpike. There's very little elevation change, and I always try to end up where I started or as close to it as possible to negate the elevation change. You don't want to do a one-way range test where you start at this elevation and finish at this elevation, or vice versa. You want to be fair to the vehicle and kind of not have much elevation loss, because that will affect the range test. So okay, we're at over 80 degrees. It's super warm, low wind, great range weather, a little bit better than the ambient conditions from what it was when I did this range test when the vehicle was new, and also the fact that the tires are worn now and they have less rolling resistance. I think that's why we actually did a little bit better. I mean, I'm reaching here now for excuses why a 3-year-old truck with 38,000 miles went farther than it did when it was brand new, but we'll analyze all that when we're done. I'll check in when I've gotten off the highway and I'm like a mile or so from the charging station, and by then we should be right around 270, 275 miles, I'm guessing. We finished up with 270 the first time. I think we're going to finish up close to that, maybe a little bit better because the conditions are better, but that means there's virtually no capacity loss. And we'll double check that when we do the charging test, which we'll do that right after we finish the range test. So check in when we're just a mile or so from Electrify America in East Brunswick, New Jersey, and see where we're at. All right, we are off the highway and on a detour because Route 18 is like closed with traffic. There's some kind of construction there, so I'm detoured through these side streets, and I'm sitting at a traffic light now. I'm about a mile from the charger, and we did an incredible, well, we're not done yet, 285 miles so far. I'm at 0% state of charge, and the nav system was telling me that I was going to arrive here at 0% state of charge for like the last 25 or 30 miles, and I'm at 0% state of charge, and it says 2 miles of range remaining. That's exactly what I ended the range test on when I did it when it was new, but I still have a mile to go, so it's probably going to drop down to 1 mile remaining. It's still at 2 miles remaining, and we are at 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour. Now, the whole first half of the test, we were jumping between 2.1 and 2.2. Then after 50% state of charge, I think when I was down around 40% state of charge, it went to 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour, and it stayed at that. And it was at 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour, believe it or not, until I got off the highway like a half a mile ago, and it just ticked up to 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour. Now that I'm driving, I'm not going 70 miles an hour anymore. I'm on these side streets. I have like 3/4 of a mile to go. So it looks like we're going to finish up with 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour, and we finished the first test when the vehicle was new at 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour. So the better efficiency would lead you to understand why the vehicle went farther. We're going to end up with 286 at this point, 286 probably 0.6 or something like that, which is 16 miles farther than it went when the vehicle was brand new. That's rough math, about 5%, I think, better, which is understandable. the conditions were better today. The wind was better. It was warmer. We're at 82 degrees now. I think I finished the first range test. It had gotten up to about 77, from 67 to 77. And here we went from 77 to 82. So that's a decent amount of temperature change where it's warmer, and electric vehicles like the warmer weather. To a point. You don't want to get over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Then it starts getting a little bit more difficult for them. But in that 80 degree Fahrenheit temperature, it's perfect range weather and very little wind today. So, all right, I'm pulling into Walmart now. This is the same charging station that I went to in the first range test on the same course. It's just that I did more turnarounds this time because I had to time it, so I was getting here with 0% state of charge, and I know the distance between all of the exits on the turnpike, and I'm constantly doing math in that final like 50 or 60 mile drive to figure out what exit do I have to get off at to circle around to come back to end up here at 0% state of charge. I'm getting very good at it, and I nailed it again today, and now we're down to 1 mile remaining. So 0% state of charge, 1 mile remaining. Let's pull into the Electrify America charging station and plug in. And then we'll do, as I mentioned, the more important segment of this battery capacity test as far as I'm concerned. And that's how many kilowatt hour that a station will dispense from 0% to 100%. All right, let me pull in here. Park, finish up. 286.7 miles driven and 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour average. We're at 82 degrees now, 270 miles at 70 miles an hour when it was brand new, 286 when it's 3 years old with 38,000 miles. I think most electric vehicle owners, regardless of their make and model, would take that 5% more with the three years and 38,000 miles under your belt. But again, as I said, you do a range test. I mean, if I charge this to 100% now and then go out and do the exact same range, I'll get a different result. Maybe 275, maybe 282, maybe 270, because the wind and, every range test is just slightly different with wind and temperature. And even when I get off and do my turnarounds, if I'm sitting long at a traffic light, that doesn't affect it much, but enough for a couple of miles. So, okay. Well, before I plug in, let's review this range test now with all of the quarterly stats, because I wrote them all down as I was driving. Okay, from 100% down to 75%, I went the farthest, 76.4 miles. That's when I had that 6 mile an hour tailwind, and I was averaging 2.1 mile per kilowatt hour. But as I said before, the kilowatt hour display was flipping between 2.1 and 2.2 the whole time. Okay, from 75% down to 50%, I went 70.4 miles, and that's why we were at the 146.8 miles that we were when I checked in at 50%, and we were still averaging 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour. But again, that display just kept flipping between 2.1 and 2.2. It just so happened that at 75% and 50%, when I took the picture, it was at 2.1. And then from 50% down to 25%, I went 70 miles exactly. We were at 218.8 miles, and now the consumption rate was steady at 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour. And then from 25% down to 0, I went 69.9 miles. We finished up with 286.7 miles and a 2.3 mile per kilowatt hour consumption rate. But as I mentioned, the truck was at 2.2 miles per kilowatt hour until I got off the highway. Right when I got off the highway, it jumped up to 2.3. So I guess it was right on the edge. Not sure exactly how Ford rounds up or rounds down the kilowatt hour. I wish they gave us the 100th like some other vehicles do, but they don't. They just show you the 10th. So I can only assume we were close to 2.3 for most of that last quarter of the range test. And as soon as I got off the highway, it was enough to tick it up to 2.3. All right, now I'm going to hop out, plug it into this charger, do a full 0 to 100% charge recording, and then we'll take a look and compare how many kilowatt hour the station dispenses versus how many kilowatt hour it dispensed in that same 0 to 100% charge recording that I did when the vehicle was brand new. So you saw me plugging in the Lightning there, but what you didn't see was I had forgotten to disable the plug-in charge, which the Lightning has through my Ford app with Electrify America. And the reason why I needed to disable it was because if you use plug-in charge and charge on the Electrify America network through the Ford Pass, you don't get the charging discounts that Electrify America members get. And I'm a member, so I get a discount. And if you could see here, it says, welcome driver to the Ford plan, and they were going to be billing me 64 cents per kilowatt hour. I don't want to pay 64 cents per kilowatt hour, so I quickly shut off the charger, but it had dispensed 0.2879 kilowatt hour. And we're going to need to add that to the total amount of kilowatt hour that the station dispenses when I do the full 0 to 100% charge recording. So I need to point that out. I shut the charger off. I turned it back on, this time after disabling plug-in charge, and I was able to authenticate the charging session through my Electrify America app. You see here it says, welcome Thomas. It knows it's me. And now instead of 64 cents per kilowatt hour, I'm paying 48 cents per kilowatt hour, 16 cents per kilowatt hour less, which is 33% less. And that means I'm going to save over $20 on this charging session. I love that Ford has plug-in charge enabled on the Electrify America network, but there has to be a way that they can link it to your membership account if you have a membership with Electrify America. Otherwise, I tell everybody, if you have an Electrify America membership, to make sure you disable plug-in charge if you have a Ford electric vehicle and you go to Electrify America sites. Otherwise, you're going to be paying like a 33% premium just to have the ability to use plug-in charge. It's not that hard to plug in and hit swipe to charge on the app. It's not worth 33% more. Okay, so after doing that and plugging back in, I did the full 0 to 100% charging session. It took a lot longer than it should because this charger that I selected that day was derated and I was only getting at the best 100 kilowatt. Should have been able to pull about 190 kilowatt in that first 10 minutes of charging, but in any event, I sat it out for the full charging session. And at the end of the charging session, the station said that it delivered 134.8 kilowatt hour. Now, if you add the 0.2879 kilowatt hour that I pumped into the vehicle in that first like 10 seconds of charging, the total is 135.0879 kilowatt hour. And if you remember when I was in the vehicle, I talked about how when the vehicle was brand new and I did full 0 to 100% charge recordings, the station usually dispensed somewhere between 134 and 136 kilowatt hour. So we're right there. It literally took in as much energy as it did when it was brand new. There is zero degradation on this truck. Now, there has to be some amount of degradation. Batteries degrade. So it must be that Ford gradually eats away at the buffer that you have because there's a total capacity and a usable capacity. The usable capacity on the extended range Lightning is 131 kilowatt hour. Total capacity, I think it's around 146 or 148, somewhere around there. Ford never really officially disclosed the total capacity. And I know some automakers, as the vehicle ages and the battery slowly degrades, they eat into that buffer so the customer still gets 100% of the usable capacity as when it was new. Now it gets to a point where they can no longer do that because they need to leave a certain amount of buffer. I don't know for a fact that Ford does this. I highly suspect they do because I don't believe the truck could be 3 years old and have nearly 40,000 miles and not have even lost 1 kilowatt hour of battery capacity. That just would be impossible for me to believe. But in any event, I still have the full battery that I had when it was brand new. So let's take a closer look now at the stats of the range test and this charge test. Okay, as far as the range test goes, when it was brand new, I went 270.3 miles. I finished the range test, 0% state of charge with 2 miles of estimated range. 3 years later, I repeated the same test on the same course. The ambient temperature was a little bit warmer, which is a little bit better for range. I talked about the tires being a little worn, which is also better, and also the wind. All those three factors conspired to allow me to drive 286.7 miles, which is 16.4 miles farther than I was able to go when it was new. I ended the range test with 0% state of charge and 1 mile of estimated driving range. And that works out to a 6% range improvement. But as I mentioned numerous times in this video, it wasn't because the battery is bigger or the vehicle can just go farther. I'm sure that was just due to the conditions being better for the vehicle to go a little bit farther. And as for the charging test, I dug up 2 of my original 0 to 100% charge recordings and looked at the final results. On the first test, the station dispensed 136.3208 kilowatt hour. And on the second charge recording, the total was 134.1301 kilowatt hour. Now the test here 3 years later, the total was 135.0879 kilowatt hour, basically right in the middle of the 2 original charge tests that I did back 3 years ago when the vehicle was brand new. There is no difference in the usable capacity that this truck has after 3 years and nearly 40,000 miles driven. So the conclusion here is my truck, after 3 years and 38,000 miles of driving, retained the same amount of usable capacity of the battery as it did when it was brand new. Now, as I mentioned, there has to be some sort of capacity loss. So Ford must be slowly opening up more capacity. But that really should give people a confidence that electric vehicle batteries last. You know, they're not something that after 4 or 5 years you need to buy a new battery, which you see a lot of that online. And, you know, people talk about electric vehicles and they say, oh, wait till you have to buy a new battery after 4 or 5 years. That just isn't the case. Yes, batteries can fail. There can be catastrophic failures that would cause a battery to fail. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, the batteries are warranted for between 8 and 10 years and at least 100,000 miles. Some are warranted for like 150,000 miles. And many of those warranties also cover capacity loss in addition to some sort of a catastrophic failure where modules or the whole pack has to be replaced. They're also guaranteed that it'll retain a certain amount of capacity over that warranty period. So I know I'm not going to be triggering any capacity loss on my Lightning. My 3-year warranty is up, the basic warranty on the vehicle. I just actually renewed it because I plan on keeping the truck, but the battery warranty is still intact. The original battery warranty, I still have that for a long time. But again, I don't think I'm going to be using that for capacity loss. Of course, something could go wrong with it. You know, things break. You know, combustion vehicles break all the time. Electric vehicles can break also. But as for capacity, the truck is as good today as it was 3 years ago when I picked it up. And I think that's remarkable. All right, well, that's all I have here today on my F-150 Lightning battery capacity comparison, new versus 3 years old. I hope that you learned a little bit here. If you have any questions about this, please leave them in the comment section. And this is your first time here at State of Charge, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming electric vehicle news and reviews. And as always, thanks for watching.